coming to the 3-6, we come to the sixth line for the first time. So let's take a look at the first line and grasp the essence of what the sixth line is all about. The first thing to recognize about a sixth line is that the sixth line is here to be a role model. That's what its basic nature is. The sixth line sits at the top of the hexagram structure. And technically speaking, it does not belong to the hexagram itself. It is literally the roof of the house. And as being the roof of the house, this is really the place in which the sixth line is going to live out most of its life. The sixth line is very unusual. It is unusual because it carries specific responsibilities. That is, the specific responsibility is its genetic responsibility to be the end of the sixth line of one hexagram to become the first line of the next hexagram. In other words, the continuation of the process. And because the sixth line is sitting up there on the roof of the house, what it's doing is it's looking out on the world around it. It is assessing everything that has come before it in that sense. But the reality is that you're not born on the roof. And you don't start your life on the roof. And the sixth line, wherever it is in a profile, that you have to see very clearly that the sixth line lives out a different cycle than any of the other profiles. Because it has to do with the nature of the sixth line itself. The harmony to the sixth line is the third line that is the top of the lower trigram. So the 6 and the 3 are harmonies to each other. So the first thing to understand about the sixth line and the way it operates in this life is that it is going to live out for its Saturn cycle, the first 28.6 years of its life, it's going to live out a third line theme. So if you come into the world and you have a sixth line, whether that's a 3-6, a 6-2, or a 6-3, if you have any of these 3 out of the 12 profiles, you're going to go through 3 different cycles in your life. And the first cycle takes 28.6 years, and that's the time of your life in which you live out a third line theme. Now imagine what that's like to be a 3-6. That means in the first 28 years, 29 years of your life, you got a 3-3 theme. In other words, life is nothing but chaos. Trial and error at the personality level, trial and error at the unconscious level, a constant movement. So all 6 lines have to go through this sequence. Now the sequence is necessary because it's out of this third line theme in the first cycle of their life that they get the experience that they need. They're going to be very different afterwards. They run around and scurry around 29 years, bumping into this, bumping into that, bumping into this, collecting all of these experiences. And then when they get to 28.6 years, they take a ladder and they put it beside the house and they climb up onto the roof and they say, I had enough. Nothing works. Nothing works. I've got my book. I've got my list. I got 8,000 things that don't work. I got 3 things that do. And one of them is that I can climb up this ladder and get on a roof. So what happens to the 6 line person is that by the time they're 28.6 years of age, they put the ladder by the roof, they go up onto the roof, and they stay there. They become aloof. They begin to disconnect from personally being involved in life. And in this process of disconnecting, the irony of that is that they begin to get their authority in life. You see, the moment that they sit up there on the roof and they start disconnecting personally, that's the moment that everybody else walking around down below says, I wonder what they see. Because they're the ones with the perspective up there on the roof. They're looking for the role model. They're looking for perfection. Nothing seeks out perfection more than the 6th line. It is looking for the holy grail of perfection. And when it discovers in its first 29 years that it's a myth, that there is no projection, and that it's overwhelmed by its double third line theme, that it's all pessimistic, it crawls up onto that roof and it's really disheartened. However, All 6 lines genetically are coupled with inherent optimism. Nothing has worked so far, but maybe if I sit up here long enough and I watch long enough, maybe I'll see something that actually works. So they become authorities. The classic of this is the 19th gate 6 line. It's called the recluse. It's the fool on the hill. And it's the great thing to understand about the power of the 6th line and how important it is, because it's the 6th line that gives the holy blessing. You know, you're blessed. It's okay. Hey, everybody has to find the 6th line in their life to bless them. They need it. They all go looking for it. So what happens is that the 6th line is sitting up there on the hill, and they're looking down on the village below, and the village is going about its village life. And then one day, a 5-1 like me goes wandering into the village and says, hey, look, God spoke to me directly, knows my name, said to me, it's going to rain, we're going to have to build an ark here. Now, of course, the villagers really don't know what to do. You know, the 5th line is very seductive. They've got their foundation. They have plans for how the ark should look and how much time it will take and all this stuff. One of the villagers goes up on the hill, goes to the 6th line that's sitting up there on the hill, and says to the 6th line, I know that you're disengaged from life and you've been looking down here and watching us, so I'd like to ask you something. There's this person that came and said that God said that it's going to rain and we should build an ark. Now look, if that 6th line looks up into the sky and says it doesn't look like rain, the villagers build a fire and cook the heretic. Over. If the 6th line is sitting up there and says, smells like rain, all the villagers go down there, get busy building the ark. So think about the inherent power of the 6th line. It is therefore confirmation. But there's something to deeply grasp about this, something that we touched on when we looked at the 3-5. This first part of their life, where they're going to have to live out this dynamic trial and error theme. The moment that they are made to feel uncomfortable, the moment they're made to feel inadequate, the moment that they see that their trial and error is nothing but pessimism, and that the pessimism is justified, when they climb up onto the roof, they don't have peripheral vision. They've been narrowed in the way that they see. And they're limited in what they can really look at and what they can be clear about. And at the moment that they recognize that their trial and error process is the basic ingredient of their wisdom later, is the moment that no longer is it a mistake, it's experience, it's the gathering of material so that eventually they can really be of value to the community that will be dependent on them for their confirmation. So that 6th line is going to go up on the roof and it's going to stay there for a cycle. That cycle is going to go from the Saturn return, which is at 28.6 years, and it's going to go until the Chiron return, which is approximately 51 years of age. The Chiron theme is deeply mysterious. It's mysterious at many levels. We could play all kinds of mystical stuff with this. First of all, it's only recent that it's discovered. In the 1970s, Chiron came to our attention. It's a physical object. It's basically probably frozen ice and dust. It's about the size of Manhattan Island, and it's in an orbit right in the middle between Saturn and Uranus. And when it was discovered, it was given this mythological name, which is about the healer-wounder theme in life. Yet one of the things to recognize about the Chiron theme, all 6 lines know this naturally. When they get to that point, it's usually around 50, 51 years of age. When they get to that point, they have to come down off the roof. You see, if they don't come down off the roof, they can't go to the next first line. They can't continue the process. And we have to have this genetic continuity, so we need them to come down. That's why they have a unique cycle compared to all other profiles. That 6th line, it's always being demanded upon it that it experience the nature of its hexagram, that it then rise above that and see all the other examples of that, And then finally, in recognizing what really works, to enter back into the world and be a living example rather than somebody that can point out where examples are. And of course, that's the whole process of the sixth line. So it goes deep into life in its first 30 years, trial and error, all kinds of processes. Then it climbs up onto the roof of the house, and when it's 51 years of age, genetically, all 6 lines are forced off the ladder. That is not true for the rest of us. I mean, I'm a 5-1. I'm not a 6-line person. Now, one of the things to understand about that is that the 6-line being is really a guide for all of us. Because the moment that you come in touch with what your Chironian theme is, that you really have a closing theme for your life. See, most human beings, other than 6-line people, will live out their Uranus opposition as the theme for the second half of their life. Only people with a natural 6-line profile are automatically going to be forced off the roof when they're 51. But it means that all of us can take advantage of that knowledge. All of us can take advantage of our own Chironian themes in order to re-involve ourselves at that point of reaching 50 in our lives, to re-involve ourselves in a vital way in what life can offer us. So it is natural for the 6th line, but it's possible for everyone else. And because this is so recent, this is really an opening up for us at the same time that our lifespan is consistently so much longer. In other words, there is really a need now for us to have post-Chironian themes in which we can get re-involved in life. My father at 51, my age, was ready to quit. I mean, it was basically over. I mean, he saw himself as an old man. I ain't an old man. It's a very different, we live in a very different consciousness. So the Chironian theme that's opening up for us, that is brought to us by all the 6-line beings, this is this opportunity to find a completion theme in the life process. So when we're looking at this final profile of the lower trigram, and we come to the 3-6, you can see the difficult dilemma in this. Do we have a 3-6 here? I know we have a 6-3, but do we have a 3-6? No. Again, you'll see that these harmonic crosses, that is, they are the changing crosses, the last 7 minutes and 30 seconds of the line, you'll recognize right away that they're not common in the population. In other words, if you look amongst all of your friends and if you have a lot of charts, you'll see you don't get a lot of these people. They're very important bridging people for us. They're, after all, creating the links. The 3-6 is going to create a very important link to the 4-6, which will take us into the upper trigram process. But we don't get a lot of them. And when I say that, by the way, I don't know what the statistical profiles look like. Because obviously, in terms of humanity, what our general reproductive cycles are, where the peaks and valleys are. But one of the things that we're going to find is that when you're dealing with harmonic crosses, you're dealing in tens of millions instead of hundreds of millions. That's really the main difference. There's not a lot of them percentage-wise, but you're going to see that still in the population, you're going to have them out there and you're going to meet them along the way. It's like reflectors. Percentage-wise, there's not a lot of reflectors, but there's tens of millions of them that are out there. And, of course, you do get to meet them, but if you have a whole collection of charts, you're going to see that you might have 1 or 2 or 3 reflectors, whereas, of course, you're going to have many of the others. And the same thing, again, is true of these harmonic crosses, these changing crosses. There's not a lot of them around. Okay, so the 3-6 starts off with a very difficult theme. It starts off with a double 3 as a theme for it in the first 28 years of its life. In other words, that design profile that you see there for the 6th line, where it's the role model administrator, you can forget about that until they're 28.6 years old. It's not the operative theme. They're going to double up on just the personality side. So you can imagine what kind of chaos there is. This is just the anarchist, martyr, pessimistic, sustaining their way through broken bonds. I mean, that's what they are. Plow, 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 plow. And you can imagine what that's like for them, because that's such an intense process. They don't have the protection of an unconscious that is in a different thematic. They're just limited to that double three, and they're limited to all of that chaos and trial and error in their process. Obviously, if they're unaware of that, or if they are children and their parents are unaware of that, they are really going to be seen as problem children. There's no question about that. They are really going to be seen as if they truly have some kind of difficulty. Nothing really works for them. Nothing goes smoothly for them. They can't seem to hold on to any kind of relationship. They can't hold on to a friend, any of those things. There's this constant movement. Now, it's very difficult. Yet at the same time, if they understand that that's natural for them, and that they're going to have to live that out until they're 28, and there is nothing they can do about it, and it's all okay, then by the time they climb up to the roof of the house, it's going, first of all, be such a relief. You can imagine the relief when that 6-line theme finally kicks in, and they can crawl up onto the roof and lie down there and say, oh, I'm out of it now. I'm saved. Now, if they go up there deep in their pessimism, truly uncomfortable within themselves and with the world, again, it's going to skewer the way in which they're going to look at the whole that they're observing. And one of the things that you will see about the nature of the 6th line is that it is here to be objective, and it's only through its objectivity that it can be honored. In the same way that the 5th line can only transpersonalize through being practical, that the 6th line can only transpersonalize through being objective. And without objectivity, they will not be respected. They will not get to live out their role. So objectivity is expected of them. That's why they're at their best when they get up onto the roof of the house. You see, they disengage from life. So everybody around them figures they're not subjective anymore. They don't really care what happens. They're just watching. And so they're easy people to go to. It's like, they're not involved, You see, the magic that is there for the 6th line is their process in finishing. They reach 50, 51, and all of a sudden the ladder is back up beside the house. And that ladder pulls them down. It just drags them down, screaming, their claws deep into the wall as they screech down the side, saying, but look, I had all this respect up here. Everything was easy. I didn't have to be involved. Everything was okay. Why am I, Yeah. You see, because what it's all about is that at a certain point, the 6th line has to live out what its nature is. Its nature is to be a role model. Its nature is to be a role model, the role model. And it goes through the 3 phases that all role models must go through. They have to go through chaos. They have to go through experience. They have to see all the many things that don't work, so that they will be driven and sensitized to find those things that do work. Because that's what they're going to look for, and they're not going to waste their time watching things that don't work. They will recognize that right away. And yet at the moment that they're up on the roof and they have this objective perspective where they can look out and they can see things objectively, that it isn't enough in the end to be the authority that says, there's a good example, there's a good example, but that's not them being the example. In the end, in order for them to go back to the root, to complete the snake, they've got to go back to the 1st line. They have to come down off of the roof. They have to live in the world. And they've got to live in the world with their feet on the ground, and they have to be the example in their life. That's very different than looking and pointing at where the examples are in the world. When we come to the projected attitude, we have at the surface, we have the 3rd line anarchist. And again, you can see the deep anarchy that's going to be there in the first 30 years of this life. nothing works, tearing things down. These are children that can get very destructive. They're the kind of kid that if a toy doesn't work, they smash it. They just smash it. It doesn't work. I can smash it. It's useless. And I don't want it around here because every time it's around here, I'd like it to work and it doesn't work. So I just smash it and then it's not around here. It doesn't bother me anymore. And then their parents don't buy them any more toys, You shouldn't do that, Johnny. Yeah. That anarchist becomes an administrator. I mean, that's the magic of the 3-6, eh? You have this incredible anarchy in the first 30 years of their life, and yet the moment that they get up onto the roof of the house, boy, are they valuable. They know all that stuff. They have seen all of it in detail. They've suffered through it on the cross. They're a martyr. This was awful. That was terrible. They know all of those things, and they become the objective voice of that. Now, you see, they have two roles. You go up to them, you shout up to the roof, and you ask them questions about, will this be okay? And they go, no, that doesn't work. That's their job at that level. But their own job is that while they're waiting in between being asked for their authority, they're out there looking. They're looking. They're looking to see if there's anything that actually works. I mean, that's one of the deepest things in them, because underneath this deep pessimism of the third line is this incredible optimism of the sixth line. I mean, what was Ogden Nash's poem about the man with the silver lining who swallowed a serving tray? And he was still smiling. He was optimistic about all that. He was a man with a silver lining, after all. There is this unbounded optimism that's tied up with the sixth line. It's like nothing works. However, maybe God will show up tomorrow. Any kind of extreme, eh? They're the kind of people that'll hold on to that. Mutation takes place in a moment, and they'll optimistically hold on to that moment forever. Sitting up there on the roof saying, none of it works, but I'm really hopeful, I'm optimistic that maybe, possibly, I will find something that can work in this life. What it says is about the harmony between these words, pessimism and optimism. And they're a harmony. And of course, the pessimism, because we give negative connotations to words. The moment that we understand that pessimism is healthy, not unhealthy, that it's a good, solid trait, it's important for us to know what doesn't work, then we can begin to see that out of that comes the potential for optimism. You see, these are not fools. I mean, just because they go through a lot of things, and other people may assume that they're making mistakes, don't ever kid yourself. These are not fools. These are sharp people. They know a lot. They learn a lot in that process, in that trial and error process. They're mutative. They learn how to do things differently. They learn that things can always be done differently. And out of this sharpness, out of recognizing what doesn't work, comes their mutative potential to recognize what can work for the other, but ultimately what can work for them. For them. Because, of course, they have the most difficult psychic life of any of the profiles. They have to go through these three dynamic changes in life, whether they like it or not. We all have a Saturn cycle. It doesn't have the same intensity as somebody that's going to carry a 3-6 profile. The bonding strategy is great. You've got this personality, bonds made in broken trial and error. This relationship doesn't work, that relationship doesn't work, this one doesn't work, that one doesn't work. None of them will ever work. I'm going up onto the roof of the house. And while I'm up there on the roof of the house, I'm going to look and see everybody else's relationship and see that that one doesn't work and that one doesn't work. But wow, that one over there does. I wonder how they do that. That's 6th line. That is their capacity always. out of their pessimism comes the assumption that they can never find what their unconscious demands. Their unconscious demands a soulmate. Their unconscious demands the perfect lover. Perfect in all ways, every way, every day, all the time, even after they're dead. And they learn very quickly that they can't find that, surprisingly enough. They only find trial and error. They only find problems. They only find things that they can't really stay with. Now, of course, what they are looking for is that they're looking for a relationship that will ultimately be based on something that only 6 lines care about. Really, you won't believe me, but it's okay. Trust. 6 lines are deeply, deeply, deeply mesmerized by trust. I mean, it's everything for them. You know, if they can't trust it, it isn't worth anything. So it's not just that they have to find the perfect soulmate for the 30.8 seconds that they may have them in their grasp, but that they have to be able to trust that it's going to be the same forever. They have to deeply be able to trust in that. They have to deeply be able to trust in life. You see, they learn very early that life is not to be trusted. It's dangerous. It's treacherous. It's all third-line stuff. It's all trial and error. You can't hold on to love. Nothing really seems to work. And when you go up onto the roof of the house, it's like, enough now. Enough. You know, I'm not going to find it. It's not out there. And yet their optimism keeps them looking. You know, there's a part of them that says, well, yes, I haven't found it, but, you know, my cosmic lover is out there somewhere. Most people don't understand the nature of the 59-6. This is where this theme comes from. The 59-6 is the line called the one-night stand. And everybody looks at that and thinks, oh, my God. Well, that 59-6 is a one-night stand in the first 28.6 years. That's what it's about. You know, you get into this relationship and you get into that. You get this sense of pointless promiscuity, not just sexually, in intimacy generally, just pointless promiscuity, being open to all kinds of forces. And obviously out of that comes a real deep pessimism about the potential of relationships. This is why when they crawl up onto the roof of the house, they really disengage. And at the same time, that's when they heal. I mean, don't think of it as running away. After all, it's their genetic code. They're not running anywhere. They're just following a pattern. But the necessary part of that pattern is that from the time they have their Saturn return until their Uranus opposition, they're actually healing. And it takes about 11 years for them to heal. That is a Jupiterian cycle. In other words, it takes a long time to get over the pain of what they went through in their first Saturnian cycle. Now, again, when I'm describing these things and describing them in this way, I'm talking about people living out the not self. I mean, please be clear about that. If you're living out your design, if you're entering into things correctly, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have chaos as a 3-6 in your process, but your relationship to it will be different. In other words, each one of those experiences are not going to carry the expectation that this is it, that this is going to be it. Each one of those experiences are only going to carry what they really are, that this is an experience, that it's something to collect, and that there's tremendous pressure on them in this first part of their life to engage in experience. It doesn't matter then what the experiences are, if they enter into them correctly. And at the moment that they see that by entering into them correctly, that if they do not work, they are not to blame. I mean, you know, blame, shame, and fault. You know, this is a horrible game in life. When I first wrote the manuscript of the first book on human design, I had subtitled it in the manuscript, A Manual for No-Fault Living, because that's what this is about. It's about no-fault living. There's no blame in all of this. You can't blame somebody for making mistakes if they carry a third line. I mean, that's simply torture. It's nothing else. It's cruel. Instead of just seeing what it is. And for them to see what it is, so they see its worth. And that they recognize that out of their very process, things happen, things get discovered that other people never get to see. There's real beauty in all of that. See, I never have difficulty in seeing the beauty in anybody's chart or in anybody's profile, because it's there. It's only the not-self that makes life ugly. It's only the not-self that turns life into a painful ordeal. It isn't. It really isn't. So the reality is for the 3-6, yeah, sure, they're going to have a lot of chaos in those 30 years, and it doesn't mean they're not going to suffer, and it doesn't mean it isn't going to hurt whether they entered into it correctly or not, but it doesn't mean that it's going to blind them to their purpose, that their purpose was to go through that. Their purpose is enriched through that. And that when they climb up onto the roof of that house, by the time they get through their healing experience, they're going to be real valued citizens for others. They are, after all, the fools on the hill. They're not like the hermit. They're not hidden away. You can see the fool up there. You know they're up there watching you. That's their job. And so, you go up there and you talk to them. And you ask them about this or that, and you begin to discover their objectivity. You also begin to discover that, you admire their pessimism. This is one of the funny things that happens with six-line people when they're on the roof of the house, is that the pessimism that so disturbed them becomes a marvelous tool in relationship to others, because others like the fact that they're pessimistic. They know they're not being misled. They know they're, no, that wasn't work. That's not good. No, don't try that. They like that. It makes them feel better. Right? So the nature of being a role model is completed in this first martyr profile, is being completed by the time that this role model then gets to that Chiron point in their life. That 3-6 at that point, think about what's happened to them. They have all their experiences, they go through their healing, they disconnect, they watch the world, they start getting respect from the community around them, they start making money from that, they start building their reputation from that, it makes them feel good, they become a recognized authority for whatever it is, and then 51 comes around, and the ladder goes up beside the house, and their nails go into the wall as they screech down because they're losing it. They're losing their authority, they're losing their aloofness. All of a sudden they can't be detached from what's going on around them. They begin to suffer for dying babies in Biafra. Instead of just being objective about all of that, suddenly they're coming down into the world. Then they really have to be a role model. In other words, they have to be a living example. It's the greatest challenge. And it says something to all of us, that until we're 51 years old, none of us really have a chance to be a role model. We have a lot to learn, and we have a great learning arc in this life. And it means that by the time we get to that point, we do have the equipment, the intelligence, to finally be able to live out the example of what it is to be us. All 6 lines teach us that. That when we get to that point in our life, it's essential for us to be the example ourselves, to be a role model ourselves, not to live out hypocrisy. And by hypocrisy, all I mean is to be able to say to others what is right, but not to be able to engage yourself. The little story I told you about the 5-1 coming to town and telling them about the rain coming. You see, when that 6th line is truly ready to come down off of the roof, when the villager comes up and says, this guy says it's going to rain, and he says we should build an ark, what we should do. When that 6th line looks up into the sky and says, smells like rain, says, come on, I'll go with you. Let's build this ark. The fool has to come down off of the hill. It's got to get its fingers dirty again. It's got to stand beside others and amongst them. And it's got to share in what it knows is correct as a living example. These are people that truly are, they can have light around them. And I'm always uncomfortable with fishy statements. However, there's real truth in that. That is, the living example is the most impressive thing that we have in life. It really is. And when our living examples are not the byproduct of propaganda, are not examples that are being offered to us or proffered to us, the moment that we really meet somebody who is an example in their own life, this has enormous impact on everybody that has access to them. So it's a very beautiful stage in their life, but it does mean that they have quite a trial to go through. In other words, they have to come down off of that roof. They have to give up the safety of what the roof has been to step back into a world that they know all too well is full of things that don't work. It's full of them. But then again, when they come back down, they're not looking for what works. They're living what they are, and that works, and that's their example. Right? The aspire to role. We've seen, of course, the impressiveness of all third lines, that third lines have this deep capacity to sustain, to stay with things, to not give up. It's why they can, build up such a martyr business. You hit them and they stand up, and you hit them and they stand up, and you hit them and they stand up, and they don't just turn the other cheek, they turn all their cheeks. They keep on doing it. So, at one level they can be very impressive, but of course if you keep on doing that and you keep on living that out, what you think about yourself and how you feel about yourself can be horrendous. So they can really stay with things, but look at what the sustainment brings them. I mean, the sustainment brings them objectivity. I mean, that's what it brings them, if they can stay with it. Now remember, they're designed to. The whole thing is the quality of what kind of a survivor they are when they get to the roof when they're 28. Do they crawl up onto that roof and just collapse, and moan for the next 11 years? Or do they get up on that roof and say, well, I'm ready to look now? In other words, how they enter into their process, how clear they are within themselves is going to dictate the quality of that life that they're going to have on the roof. But it leads to objectivity. It means that the longer they can sustain, the more they can sustain, the more experiences they can accumulate without them being scars. It's not about being wounded. It's not about seeing oneself as being less able or capable. It's just about recognizing that's your trip. You got to go through the experiences. You have to collect them. Your opportunity will come. Your life will stabilize. You're really going to have an opportunity of years on the roof. Everything's going to be okay. As long as they know that, then they're going to get to that point, and their objectivity is what's really of value to us. I mean, after all, if you look at all these profiles, it's only the sixth line that brings us any objectivity. Everything else is deeply subjective. So we need to have them not distorted in the first part of their process. We need them to see clearly that the bad experiences that they put far away may have been one of the most important experiences that they've had. And that the material and the lessons from those experiences, rather than being suppressed, repressed, or whatever kind of language you want to use, they are experiences that are necessary for the ultimate objectivity. In the sexuality, in the bonding, with the bonds made and broken in the soulmate, I was there a few moments ago, and when we were looking at that, we saw very clearly that the sixth line has a real dilemma in terms of its sexuality. A lot of trial and error in the first part of its process, and then its need to be aloof, its need to separate itself. Now, usually what happens is that, these are not people that live alone. These are not hermits. They can become aloof with partners. It's just about separating themselves, disconnecting themselves in a general sense, but finding a place where they can be safe, where they can be protected, and at the same time still have the advantage of being able to look out on the world around them. Now, of course, you have to see that only when they are at the end of their process, in other words, only when they get to the Pyrrhonian point, can they really discover what a soulmate is. In other words, they go through this process while they're up on the roof, looking around at all the possibilities of the examples of what relationships can be. And they'll be comparing that to what they know relationships are, always looking to see if there is a perfection possible. After all, the sixth line is looking for perfection always. When they have to enter back into the world, when they have to come down off of the roof, then they have to have a relationship that is free of question. In other words, they have to see it is correct for them. And they have to be able to be themselves in that relationship. And if they can be themselves in that relationship, they have found what is necessary. After all, that is what it's about for the sixth line when it comes back into the world, is to see that in being itself, in following its own nature, it is an example and its life is correct for it. No longer trial and error. No longer questioning. Simply being there and being in their role. Now, by the way, there are very few 3/6s that get to that point. We will see tomorrow when you're dealing with the personality sixth line, both in the 6-2 and the 6-3, that it's much more common for them to successfully move through their Chironian phase. It's much more difficult for the 3-6 because the sixth line is unconscious and because of the deep intensity of the first 30 years. But mostly because they don't have conscious access to that. You know, if you meet that profile, you know, they really need a lot of encouragement. You know, they need the encouragement to see that, you know, they really are on the right path, that it really is correct for them to be them, and for them to see that they are of value to us because of all those experiences. But it's much more difficult for them to finish their Chiron process, just like it is for the rest of us who don't have six-line themes in our profile. In other words, it's really only for the six-line personality that it's really absolutely essential, because they can't avoid it. They have conscious access to being pulled off the roof. You know, if you meet a three, you know, right now there's about, I don't know, it's some incredible number, how many people are turning 50 every minute now in America. It's an amazing, the whole baby boom is turning 50. And so there's a vast number of human beings here, maybe 40 million, maybe 50 million people that are entering into their Chiron phase. Now, of course, the 3/6s that are entering into that phase now, if you go up to them and you ask them, do you notice, you know, any real change in your life at this point? There's no real recognition. Their personality still has them deep in the third line reality. Yet if you ask a 6-2 or a 6-3 when they go to turn 50, 51, if you notice anything different, boy, are they going to tell you, because they can feel it. There's something really going on, and they can really feel it. Now, the rest of us don't. That's why the sixth line is there as an example for us to be able to lead us into this understanding that all of us have a finishing theme in this life. We all have a post-50-year theme for us to live out. And it's very important. So many of my students come to me late in their lives, middle lives, whatever. You know, between 40 and 50 is very common for me in terms of the people that come. And it's one of those things to see that this knowledge really gives latecomers to themselves. After all, we're not kids that can get the advantage of knowing early. That we can have the opportunity not only to come to see what it is to be us, but to have a real dynamic theme at work through which we can finish our life process and put that self that is our self to work at that and really see the reward that comes from that, because it's a beautiful thing and it's a beautiful opportunity. But again, it's something new. You know, this is a thematic that more and more people will begin to describe as we move into the next century, because we're going to have more and more information about this experience. It is something that's fresh for us. And it's the six lines that are showing us the way. If you find six-line profiles in your life around you, and they're at that point in their life, you know, you talk to them. They'll tell you what that feels like. It's an important thing to come to grips with. So Chiron is recently a part of our consciousness. And the more and more that we become aware of the fact that there is a closing cycle for us, that it has a specific point for us, and that we can really see that cycle and come to understand what it is mechanically, it's going to open up a whole new spectrum of living out life. After all, we live longer, and it's very important for us to have dynamic themes for the post-50-year period. And for the first time, we're going to be able to see how our purpose is linked to that. And again, it is the 6 lines that are showing us the way. In other words, they're the ones that are saying, look, we have to be dragged down off of the roof, but let us be an example for you. Why don't you come off your roof too? Okay, you can enjoy this too. And finally, the security strategy. Like all third lines, bonds made and broken are always their themes when it comes to sex and security. And of course, after all, in the first 30 years, there's all kinds of turmoil, as we've seen in that process for the 3-6 profile. However, what it's really about is seen in the unconscious humanity. In other words, for the 6th line, everything is about trust or not. I mean, everything. That's why they become trustworthy. I mean, that's why we trust them. We go to them for their objectivity because we trust them. Because we know what's important to them is what they can trust. And if they don't trust something, then it's a very good guide for the rest of us not to trust that either. At the end of the process, in order for the 6th line to finish its job, to come down off the roof, to then begin with the new foundation in the next line, in order for it to be able to do that, it has to be able to trust in itself. It has to be able to trust that it is correct. You know, role models are harder on themselves than anybody else. They're so tough on themselves. They always see what could be better and might be better, and they could have done it better, and they should have done it better, and other people and everything else. They like things to be correct. They like things to be perfect. And that whole phase when they're up on the roof is to finally come to a point, through the recognition that comes from others of their authority, that their life has been of value. And that their very authority to recognize objectively what is of value to others can also guide them themselves. That not only can they point their finger and say that is of value, but they can embrace that themselves. And embracing it themselves, come off the roof, come into the world, and be trust. And the only thing worth trusting is themselves. If you can trust in yourself, if you can trust in your own decision-making process, if you can trust in your authority, if you can trust in your type, then you'll be able to see that you can enter into the world, that you can be your example, and that you can be fulfilled in this life. That's what it's about. And in entering into the world and being fulfilled, you complete the process. You say, the job of this hexagram is over. It's all complete now. We've taken it, all the way through. In this case, the lower trigram. We've taken it all the way through. It's finished. Now we're ready to take the next step. So when the 3-6 comes off the roof, comes down the ladder, what happens is they go then to the upper trigram, and they go into the next level, into the next stage. They open up the way for the transformation. So when you get to the end of the lower trigram, there's the 6th line. And when you get to the end of the hexagram process, there's that 6th line. Because it is the transition field. It is the line of transition. And so always keep in mind this movement that the 6th line has to go through. The other thing is, please recognize that that is true for all the 6 lines that you have in your design. In other words, you might have the 7-6. And what that means is that as the 7-6, you're going to live out the 7-3 for the first 30 years. In other words, you're going to be an anarchist before you can become an administrator. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether that's your profile or not. 6 lines operate this way. That's their natural cycle, is to go through this developmental process. The Saturn return and then the Chiron return. So you have these 3 different cycles.